The impairment argument is usually aimed at views that deny the existence of a moral subject early in pregnancy. It tries to show that if abortion is permissible because there is no subject yet, then it should also be permissible to engage in behaviors, like heavy drinking, that severely impair the future fetus at a stage where, by that logic, no subject exists. The force of the argument comes from the intuition that intentionally causing catastrophic fetal impairment is morally wrong, even if it occurs before the fetus is conscious or self-aware. What's striking is that this same argumentative structure applies just as powerfully to a sensor-based pro-life metaphysics, even though those views are typically presented as immune to such challenges. Essence views claim that a radically new being comes into existence at fertilization, when the substantial form or soul is instantiated. Before that moment, the sperm and egg are merely matter lacking the form of a human being. Because moral status attaches to the substance rather than the material components, nothing done to the gametes counts as harming a person. This creates a sharp ontological boundary. Before fertilization, no subject exists. After fertilization, a full human subject exists. The metaphysics is elegant, but it generates a surprising moral implication. If no subject exists before fertilization, then any action that affects the genetic integrity, developmental potential, or viability of the future embryo is morally permissible as long as it occurs before the moment of conception. This includes intentionally damaging sperm or eggs, inducing chromosomal abnormalities, creating conditions that will lead to severe congenital defects, or even ensuring that the future embryo will be non-viable and die shortly after implantation. On the essence view, all of these actions are permissible because the substantial form has not yet appeared, and therefore no being exists who could be harmed. The view therefore allows the intentional creation of future individuals with catastrophic impairments, or the intentional creation of future pregnancies that will inevitably fail, so long as the harmful action is timed before fertilization. This is structurally identical to the problem the impairment argument raises for no-subject views of early abortion. Both positions tie moral status to the existence of a subject, whether defined psychologically or metaphysically. And both positions therefore permit harmful actions at earlier stages, where, by their own criteria, no subject exists. The only difference is where the threshold is drawn. The no-subject view places it later, allowing impairment during pregnancy. The essence view places it earlier, allowing impairment before pregnancy. But the underlying problem is the same. Actions that predictably and intentionally shape the future person's life, health, or existence fall into a moral vacuum until the subject appears. The deeper point is that any theory that grounds moral status solely in the presence of a subject, whether a psychological subject or a metaphysical substance, will inevitably generate a period during which actions with profound consequences for the future individual are morally unregulated. The essence view avoids the impairment argument only by relocating the absurdity to an earlier stage. It does not escape the structure of the problem, it simply shifts the boundary. Damage to gametes, both sperm and eggs, can meaningfully influence the development of a future embryo, even though no embryo exists yet. Gametes are unusually vulnerable cells because they carry not only DNA, but also the epigenetic instructions that guide early embryonic development. When a person engages in certain behaviors before conception, such as heavy alcohol use, smoking, or exposure to toxins, these actions can alter the integrity of the gametes in ways that later manifest as congenital abnormalities. This is why paternal behavior in the months before conception can matter. Sperm take roughly 3 months to develop, and during that time they are highly sensitive to oxidative stress, epigenetic disruption, and DNA damage. If sperm are impaired during this window, the embryo formed later may inherit those defects, even though the harmful action occurred before fertilization. In men, alcohol and other toxins can disrupt sperm in several ways. They can cause oxidative damage to the DNA, leading to strand breaks or mutations that affect early embryonic cell division. They can also alter the epigenetic marks, such as DNA methylation and histone modifications, that regulate gene expression in the first days after fertilization. Sperm also carry small RNAs that help orchestrate early development, and alcohol exposure can change the composition of these RNAs. These alterations do not harm a subject in a philosophical sense, because no embryo exists yet, but they can profoundly shape the health and viability of the future embryo. This is why paternal alcohol consumption in the months before conception has been associated with increased risks of birth defects, placental abnormalities, and early pregnancy loss. Women's gametes are vulnerable in different ways. Although eggs are formed before birth, they undergo final maturation in the months leading up to ovulation. During this period, alcohol, smoking, and environmental toxins can disrupt the meiotic spindle, increasing the risk of chromosomal non-disjunction, errors that lead to aneuploidy, early miscarriage, or severe congenital anomalies. Eggs also contain the mitochondria that power early embryonic development, and mitochondrial damage can impair implantation or cause developmental arrest. Epigenetic programming in the egg is equally crucial. Disruptions can affect imprinting, placental development, and organ formation. Again, these harms occur before any embryo exists, but they shape the developmental trajectory of the embryo that will later form. These mechanisms differ fundamentally from the actions of copper IUDs and Plan BA copper I, UD works by creating a localized inflammatory environment in the uterus that impairs sperm motility and prevents fertilization. Its effect is mechanical and environmental. Plan B, levonorgestrel, works by delaying ovulation, and there are some weak suggestions it also acts by thickening cervical mucus, making fertilization unlikely. For this discussion, we'll just assume this. Both methods prevent conception without harming any future organism beyond the point of intervention. This may be considered harm minimizing if outcomes were stipulated to be non-viable fetus, which miscarry and cause the mother pains. The reason for is that these now have potential essences. This contrast highlights a deep philosophical tension. Actions that genuinely impair the future child, such as heavy alcohol use that damages sperm or eggs, occur before fertilization and therefore fall outside the moral boundaries of views that tie moral status strictly to the existence of a subject. Meanwhile, contraceptive methods like copper IUDs and Plan B prevent harmful development of some impaired embryos, are often morally condemned by the same frameworks. The result is a striking asymmetry. Actions that can cause severe congenital abnormalities are treated as morally permissible because they occur too early, while actions that simply prevent conception are treated as morally problematic despite causing harms which could be on the essence view void of essence, partial molars, or failed growth embryos. All for a potential that one embryo may have the essence of value. This tension exposes a structural weakness in metaphysical views that locate moral status at the moment of fertilization and ignore the causal pathways leading up to it. This values potential asymmetrically with implications of harm that at face value appear worse in their intention and counterfactual outcome. Below is a compact, dialogo-style illustration that shows 1. A no-subject view. Moral status begins only when consciousness or psychological capacities appear. 2. An essence-substance view. Moral status begins at fertilization because a new substantial form appears. 3. How each view accuses the other of absurdity. 4. How both end up with structurally identical absurdities, just at different points in time. Conversation. No subject view versus essence view. No subject view, NS. Before consciousness emerges, there is no moral subject. So early abortion is permissible because there is no one there yet to be harmed. Essence view, EV? That's absurd. If you say there's no subject early on, then you must also say it's permissible to drink heavily or take teratogenic drugs early in pregnancy, even though that will cause severe fetal abnormalities later. Surely that's wrong. NS. But your view is no better. You say the subject appears at fertilization. That means anything done before fertilization, like damaging sperm or eggs, causing chromosomal abnormalities, or creating conditions that guarantee a malformed or non-viable embryo, is morally permissible. You allow catastrophic impairment as long as it happens early enough. EV. That's different. Before fertilization, there is no human substance yet. NS. Exactly. And before consciousness, there is no psychological subject yet. We're using the same structure. You just moved the boundary earlier. EV. But harming gametes isn't harming a person. NS. And harming a precancerous embryo isn't harming a person. Again, same structure. You allow harmful actions before your subject appears. I allow harmful actions before mine appears. EV. So we both have a period where actions that predictably cause severe defects are morally unregulated. NS. Yes. The only difference is when that period occurs. The structure is identical. How they end up in the same place. 1. Both views tie moral status to the existence of a subject. NS. The subject is a conscious being, EV. The subject is a metaphysical substance with a substantial form. 2. Both therefore create a moral vacuum before the subject appears. NS vacuum. Early pregnancy, EV vacuum, preconception. 3. Both vacuums allow actions that seem morally absurd. NS absurdity. It's permissible to drink heavily at 4 weeks because there's no subject yet, EV absurdity. It's permissible to intentionally damage sperm or eggs, causing severe abnormalities, because there's no subject yet. 4. Each view accuses the other of absurdity while ignoring its own parallel version. NS says EV allows preconception harm, EV says NS allows early pregnancy harm, both are correct. 5. The symmetry is perfect. The only difference is the location of the threshold, not the structure of the reasoning. Any theory that grounds moral status in the appearance of a subject, whether defined psychologically or metaphysically, will inevitably permit harmful actions before that subject exists. The no-subject view and the essence view are mirror images. One allows harmful actions before consciousness, the other allows harmful actions before fertilization. Both generate a period where actions with profound consequences for the future child are morally unregulated. They fault each other for absurdities, but the absurdities arise from the same underlying structure. Why the no-subject view's absurdity is actually less severe, and why the essence view's structure forces it into a deeper, more troubling contradiction. The no-subject view holds that moral status begins only once a being with the relevant psychological or experiential capacities exists. Before that point, there is no subject of harm, no one who can be wronged. Because of this, the view permits early abortion not as a moral oversight, but as a principled response to the fact that no being has yet formed. This means the no-subject view can treat early intervention as a good. It prevents the creation of a being whose life would fall below a morally acceptable threshold. If the developmental trajectory is catastrophically compromised, whether by genetics, environment, or maternal health, the no-subject view can say that preventing the formation of a suffering individual is morally preferable to allowing that individual to come into existence. In other words, the view has the conceptual resources to say, if the threshold for a minimally decent life cannot be met, it is better not to create the subject at all. By contrast, the essence or substance view insists that a full human being with intrinsic moral worth comes into existence at fertilization. Before fertilization, there is no subject, no substance, and therefore no harm can be done. This means that even actions that predictably damage the future child, such as damaging sperm or eggs, inducing chromosomal abnormalities, or creating conditions that guarantee severe disability or early embryonic death, are treated as morally permissible. The essence view must say that no harm occurs because the substantial form has not yet appeared. Yet once fertilization occurs, the view abruptly shifts. The resulting fetus must be carried to term regardless of the severity of the impairments caused earlier. The intrinsic worth of the being is said to be unchanged, even if the being's life will be filled with profound suffering. This creates a striking asymmetry. The no-subject view allows early abortion precisely because it recognizes that bringing a severely impaired being into existence can be morally problematic. It can say that intervention is justified when the threshold for a minimally decent life is not met. The essence view, however, denies that any harm can occur before fertilization, even when the gametes are intentionally damaged in ways that guarantee catastrophic outcomes. Yet once the embryo exists, the view demands that the pregnancy continue, no matter how severe the suffering will be. The view therefore permits the cause of the suffering, but forbids the prevention of the resulting life. This is why the no-subject view's supposed absurdity is actually less troubling. It allows intervention at the stage where no subject exists, and it does so to prevent the creation of a life that would fall below a morally acceptable threshold. The essence view, in contrast, creates a moral vacuum before fertilization, where actions that determine the future child's suffering are unregulated, while simultaneously insisting that once the embryo exists, its intrinsic worth overrides all considerations of suffering, quality of life, or preventable harm. The result is a deeper contradiction. The view denies harm at the moment when harm is most preventable, and demands continuation at the moment when suffering is guaranteed. The essence view can certainly say that it is prudent to avoid damaging gametes, especially if doing so predictably leads to severe abnormalities in the future child. Nothing prevents an essence theorist from appealing to broader moral frameworks, to argue that one ought to avoid harms, even before a subject exists or ontologically distinct being forms. But the problem is that the kinds of actions required to avoid such harms become extremely demanding and often implausible. To prevent all possible preconception damage, one would need to avoid not only alcohol or toxins, but also a wide range of ordinary behaviors, including non-procreative sex, exposure to environmental risks, and even lifestyle choices that might subtly affect gamete quality. The prudential requirement becomes so expansive that it borders on a form of moral overreach. It demands significant restrictions on ordinary life to protect something that, by the essence view's own metaphysics, does not yet exist as a subject of harm. The deeper issue is motivational. On the essence view, the entity being protected at the preconception stage is not a human being, not a substance, not a bearer of intrinsic worth, but merely a sperm or an egg. These are not ontologically significant entities within the framework. They are raw material, not persons. So the essence view must say, you must take extraordinary precautions to avoid harming something that is not yet a being of moral worth. This is a difficult position to defend. If the sperm and egg are not subjects, and if the substantial form has not yet appeared, then the moral motivation to protect them is weak. The view ends up requiring strong moral obligations toward entities it simultaneously insists have no intrinsic value like you or I. That tension is hard to reconcile. By contrast, the no-subject view avoids this motivational contradiction. It does not claim that the precocious embryo or the gametes are ontologically distinct beings with intrinsic worth. Yet it can still value the becoming of a future person. It can say that preventing the formation of a severely impaired individual is morally meaningful because it concerns the quality of life of the future subject, not the moral status of the gametes themselves. The no-subject view can therefore justify early intervention or harm avoidance, like drinking, including abortion, on the grounds that it prevents the creation of a being whose life would fall below a morally acceptable threshold or be impaired by it. Full stop. It does not need to pretend that gametes have intrinsic worth. It only needs to recognize that the future person have a moral value. This gives the no-subject view a more coherent structure. It does not demand extreme lifestyle restrictions to protect entities it considers morally insignificant. It does not require people to treat sperm and eggs as if they were morally weighty. And it does not force individuals to carry pregnancies to term when the resulting life will involve profound suffering. Instead, it allows for morally grounded intervention at the stage where no subject exists, while still respecting the value of the future person who might come into being. In this way, the no-subject view avoids the essence view's paradox. The essence view denies harm at the moment when harm is most preventable, yet demands continuation at the moment when suffering is guaranteed.